This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi guys. Hello, Death by Southwest. It is Tuesday night and it's pretty late, so we are going to do the best we can here. Bear with me. If you're watching this, I have this new fuzzy mic cover. I'm hoping it will kind of do something similar to what that big windscreen that I was using, which really annoyed me. But we'll see. So if you do notice a difference in the sound or mouth noises, I guess I could try and sit back a little bit. Please do let me know. I feel like I should push well, let's not have that conversation. Remember, we're trying to be professional here, guys. So, welcome back to Death by Southwest. We are today diving into a case that haunted the city of Dallas, Texas for decades. We're talking about the brutal and baffling murder of 20-year-old Angela Samota, a case that went ice cold before being solved in the most unexpected way decades later. So, we are not going to do a sense of place for Dallas because we've had cases in Dallas before. It's a big city in Texas, and that's the whole sense of place we're going to do. But I will set the scene a little bit. So this story takes place in 1984 in Dallas, a city that was booming with businesses, big hair, and that classic 80s mix of neon lights and just a little bit of danger lurking beneath the surface. Southern Methodist University, or otherwise known as SMU, was one of the top private schools in the state, a place for bright, driven students, and among them was 20-year-old Angela Samota. Angela was the kind of person that everyone loved. She was a computer science and electrical engineering major, which, if you think about it, back in the 80s, that was pretty rare. It was kind of a badass move for a woman to be in computer science and electrical engineering back in 1984. It was a largely male dominated major in school and career. Angela was very academically inclined. She often studied well into the wee hours of the morning. She was also a member of the Zeta Tau Alpha sorority, and served as the social chair for the sorority. So she was very successful academically and very successful socially. She was described as smart, friendly, independent, and according to everyone who knew her, she just had this kind of spark about her. People were really drawn to her. According to one of her best friends at the time, she said, quote, she was very vivacious and friendly, and one of the few girls in the computer science and electrical engineering department. She was the triple threat: great personality, really cute, and smart. Now, as for her earlier years in life, I don't have a ton of information on that. I do know that she was born September 19th, 1964, in Alameda, California. She also grew up without a father, but beyond that, there isn't too much out there. So we're going to focus on her life right now. So her freshman year at SMU, she dated a guy named Lance, but that didn't work out. It was a kind of an unhealthy relationship. And now, when our story takes place, she is a sophomore and she has a new boyfriend named Ben McCall. They seemingly are in a good relationship. Everything seems really nice and happy between them. And Angela just, in general, had a really busy life full of school, friends, sorority duties, and lots of fun. And on October 12th, 1984, which is when our story begins, Angela had plans just like any other college student. She had a relaxing day planned with her girlfriend and a fun night out planned with some of her other friends. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a pretty normal day, or so she thought. So, Friday, October 12th, 1984, started off like any other day for Angela. She spent the afternoon with her friend Anna Kadala, a fellow student from SMU. The two met up for a late lunch with one of their professors and then headed back to Angela's place for a quick nap before a big night out that they had planned. They were planning to hit up the State Fair of Texas first. That's where they were going to go first, which, by the way, is one of the largest state fairs in the entire country. It's massive. After the state fair, they were planning to do a little bit of bar hopping. So, aside from the state fair happening at the time, there was also something called the Red River Showdown. I think at the time it was called the Red River Shootout, but that has since been changed. And basically, that's a football game. It was between the University of Texas and the University of Oklahoma. So that was occurring at this time also. Every year, this game takes place at the Cotton Bowl in Dallas during the state fair, which brings in a massive crowd. The state fair is a pretty big draw, and then throw in this Cotton Bowl, Red River Showdown slash shootout at shootout was at that time in '84, and we're looking at about 75,000 potentially extra people in the city that aren't usually there. So the city was just buzzing. It was packed with people, lots of energy, and usual kind of chaos that can come with having major events like this happening at the same time. And being that there were so many people in one place at the same time, it makes sense that Dallas police would probably have their hands pretty full this weekend. They didn't know how full at the time. So later that evening on October 12th, this is a Friday, by the way, was getting ready for a night out with friends. She put on a black silk jumpsuit that apparently had no back, very sexy, and black pumps. Her boyfriend was not going to be joining though, because he worked as a construction supervisor and he had to get up really early the next morning. So he was going to call it a night early and skip all the festivities. However, Angela did invite a new friend, Russell Buchanan, and he was going to join her and Anna on their night out. So he walked over to her condo, but when he got there, he looked at what the girls were wearing and he was like, "Oh, I'm very underdressed." So the three of them decided to stop over at his place so that he could change into something a little more fancy before they went out. The night took them to several spots around town. They started at Bennigan's for drinks, and I don't know if it depends on like your age, because I haven't heard the word Bennigan's for a very long time. So was it like a night? Well, it was obviously an 80s thing because this is the 80s. But yeah, I'm dating myself here. So let's move on. So they started at Bennigan's for drinks, and they moved on to a place called Studebaker's nightclub. And finally, they ended the night at Nostromo restaurant, where Angela was able to get them into the exclusive Dallas hotspot upstairs from this restaurant called the Rio Room. She was friendly with the bouncer there, so he always let her and her friends in. Angela had a few drinks throughout the night, but she was really careful not to overdo it because she was actually the one driving. But even without having a ton of drinks, Angela was her usual fun, lively self. A couple of people reported that she was going from table to table, seeming to chat up almost everyone in the club. It was like she knew everyone. She was very popular, and people that she didn't know, she got to know because she was so friendly. So after a very fun night, it was sometime between midnight and 12:30, and the three of them, Angela, Anna, and Russell, decided to call it a night. Angela had plans to be up early the next morning for another college football game in Waco, Texas. So Angela dropped Russell off at his place first. Then she swung by her apartment to grab a curling iron. I'm not really sure why. And this may be misinformation. I did see this a few places, though. I actually think I saw this perhaps in the court documents, but I don't know why she stopped by her place to grab a curling iron because then she took Anna home. She dropped Anna off sometime between 12:45 and 1:30, and then Angela stopped really quickly at her boyfriend's place, Ben, just to say goodnight. Ben said that she was in a real playful mood and she was just kind of, you know, teasing him and just basically wanted to say goodnight before she headed home. So she then went home, and around 1:45 a.m., Angela called her boyfriend Ben, which he thought was strange because She had literally just stopped by, but maybe she needed to tell him something else. He answered the phone and he immediately noticed that she sounded nervous. She told him that a man had knocked on her door and asked to use her phone and bathroom. At the time, it wasn't totally clear to Ben whether the guy was already inside the house um, when she got home, which would have been really weird, or if she had let the guy in. Made more sense that she let the guy in, but this was something that Ben was wondering at the time. But either way, let's pause because who lets a total stranger in their house when you're a female alone, especially when you're a female alone? Who lets a man who's a stranger into your house to use your phone and bathroom in the middle of the night? Remember, it's 1:45 in the morning. If someone not, I don't care if a child knocked on my door at 1:45 in the morning, you better believe I am not opening that door unless I have, I'm sorry, this may offend people, but I'm not opening that door unless I have a gun in my hand. Like there's no way. And maybe that depends on, not maybe, I'm sure that depends on where you live. If you live in a very small, friendly community, perhaps you would open the door because you would probably know the person. Although, let's not forget our mini crime story from last week of the Dardine family who lived in a city with 450 people. Just saying. So, I find it very odd that she let a stranger in at 1:45 in the morning. However, it is 1984. Times are a little bit different. And Angela was well known for not just being a very kind person, but for being a very trusting person and perhaps a little bit too trusting. So on the phone with Ben, Angela said, talk to me. She sounded really tense. And basically, it was like she wanted Ben to stay on the phone with her because she felt safer if he was on the phone. And I really relate to this. And I think it's a strange thing that I believe a lot of people do. Hopefully not just myself. Obviously, Angela does this as well. But, if you're walking into a parking garage by yourself or walking to your car late at night, or for me, when I take the dogs on night walks in the dirt roads, I mean, I have pepper spray and a knife on me at all times, and I still make Mark talk to me because I just feel safer. Now, realistically, if someone jumps out of the bushes and attacks me, there's very little Mark can do. Hopefully, he would call 911 and immediately get in his car and come over, but really not much he can do. And I feel like similarly with this situation, there's not much Ben can do, but I think it's more just the illusion of feeling safe. She clearly was unsettled by this person that she let into her house. But maybe he seemed different at first. Maybe when he knocked, he seemed really nice and normal and it's late and she feels bad for him. Okay, come on in, use my bathroom, use my phone. But then once he gets in, maybe he was giving her a weird feeling. So back to the phone call. So she's on the phone with Ben. She asked him if he thought there was a payphone at the convenience store near her place. But before he could even answer, she abruptly said, "Okay, I'll call you right back." And then she hung up the phone and she never called him back. And so when she didn't call back after a few minutes, Ben tried calling her, called her a couple times, and no answer. So he was clearly worried at this point. He drove over to her house. It was only about 10 minutes away. But when he got there, he knocked on the door. No response. The front door was locked, so he decided he'd try the back door. Back door was also locked. But her car was in the parking lot. She was clearly home, so why wasn't she answering the door? At this point, Ben is veering on panicking here. Luckily, he had, if you can believe it, an early model mobile phone. If you can kind of pick, if you're old enough to remember the giant car phones that looked like a huge brick, probably something along those lines. Uh, he had it because of his construction job. Apparently, there were some perks that came with this job where he was able to try out some new technology. Obviously, it was a necessity for him. I don't know. Either way, I did hear on a different podcast that this phone, so I'm not sure about the fact checking on this, but that this phone at the time could cost up to $4,000, which in 1984, $4,000, I mean, that would be like a $30,000 phone today. So not really, but you know what I mean. Anyways, So he had this early model mobile phone, luckily, and so he decided to call. I'm not sure why, but he called directory assistance. I don't know if you just couldn't call 911 from this phone at the time, but he called directory assistance, and they connected him to the police at 2:17 a.m. And the police arrived pretty quickly, especially considering all the festivities that were going on in Dallas. They were still able to arrive pretty quickly. And they were not prepared for the awfulness of what they would find. Officer Janice Crowther and her partner were two of the first officers to arrive on the scene. And just a side note, Janice was only 20 years old when she was sent to this call, which seems exceptionally young. Same age as Angela. So you can imagine that this case rocked her because while Officer Crowther and her partner searched the condo, Ben remained just inside the front door. And thank goodness he did, because when the officers walked into Angela's bedroom, it was as if they had walked into a scene from a horror movie. Angela was lying on her bed, face up, her eyes still open, completely nude and covered in blood. Her legs were hanging off the side of the bed as if she'd either been dragged or collapsed there, kind of. There was a giant stuffed rabbit laying next to her, and it was clear that she had been stabbed multiple times. She had practically been butchered. Officer Janice Crowther said, quote, "It appeared to me that her heart was lying on top of her chest. She had been so violently and brutally stabbed that her heart was like coming out of her chest partially." In the bathroom next to her bedroom, officers found blood residue suggesting that either perhaps she had moved and been in the bathroom, but more likely that her assailant had tried to clean up a little bit. There was blood found in the bathtub and in the sink. And then they found a few other strange details throughout her apartment. This is all happening like very, this is 3 o'clock in the morning. They've just found her body and they're doing kind of their initial um, once over in the house. So they found one shoe in the living area, a woman's shoe, presumably hers. The other shoe and Angela's clothing were crumpled on the floor next to the bed. And that was about it. There wasn't much there, but what was there, which, was Angela, it was brutal and deeply disturbing. The forensic pathologist who performed Angela's autopsy revealed some horrifying details about her murder. Angela had dried blood on her chest and neck, along with blood smeared on her face and legs, and just general blood spatter across her body. From the 18 deep stab wounds to her chest and breast area, many of which were overlapping. 8 of those stab wounds pierced her heart, 5 of which also punctured her left lung. Some were so forceful that they cut through her sternum entirely. And the deepest wound went about 7 inches deep, completely penetrating her heart. So there was quite a bit of force used with this murder. Evidence suggested that something, likely a hand, was pressed over her face during the attack. The pathologist couldn't figure out the order of the stab wounds, but just the sheer brutality of this made it very clear that this was a violent assault. Her blood alcohol level was 0.09. It indicated that she had been drinking earlier in the night, she hadn't had a drink for a good while. Forensic testing confirmed that she had intercourse at or near the time of her death. A vaginal swab revealed a high concentration of phosphates and intact sperm, meaning the sexual intercourse occurred really probably moments before her death. There were no injuries to her genital area, which means that it was impossible for them to 100% say whether the sex was consensual or forced. Of course, we're assuming it's forced. And then when they had some experts later on examined this sperm that was found inside of her. Apparently, sperm within 15 minutes of being inside of a living female, it liquefies almost completely. Um, and this was, well, now I just got confused. This either was or was not. Whatever it, I have it later in the notes. Sorry, guys. Whatever it was, the sex was happening within minutes of her death, is what they were able to determine ultimately, meaning that she was not only murdered, she was also raped before she was murdered. The official cause of death was multiple stab wounds to the chest, and it was ruled a homicide. It was a vicious and seemingly very personal attack. And while the crime scene was certainly shocking and brutal, like I said, there weren't a ton of clues as to who could be responsible for this crime. Nothing was stolen, there was no forced entry, but they were able to collect blood, semen, and fingernail scrapings from the scene of the crime. So, without a ton of physical clues at this point, and remember, I know that sounds like a lot because blood and semen and fingernail clippings, like, oh, done, we'll solve this. Well, it's 1984, so not exactly. So, police decided to work on digging into Angela's life and getting to know the people in her life and trying to see if they could kind of narrow down or identify some suspects based on that. So, right off the bat, they focused on two of the most obvious suspects: Ben McCall, Angela's boyfriend. He was the last person to hear from her. And, you know, police always look to the spouse, partner, boyfriend, girlfriend of the victim. And then Russell Buchanan, who was a new friend and one of the, well, was the last person aside from Anna that Angela was seen with. They also had two additional suspects on the radar: Joseph Barlow, a guy who had what seemed to be a harmless crush on Angela. He would leave little love notes on her car from time to time. Nothing too crazy, though. And then there was Lance Johnson, her ex boyfriend. Remember, I mentioned she had a boyfriend her freshman year and it wasn't a great relationship. So Lance was not living in Dallas anymore. He was living in Abilene, Texas. But he had a bit of a dark side. At one point in his relationship with Angela, he had cut up her clothes and threatened her with a knife. So Lance was looking like a real good suspect. However, he was not living in Dallas at the time of the murder. I have that he was living in Abilene, and then I also have that he was living in Amarillo. He was living in a part of Texas, a city in Texas that began with an A, not Dallas. So police were able to confirm that he was not in Dallas that night. He was in Abilene slash Amarillo, one of them, on the night of October 12th. Plus, his blood type did not match the blood that they found at the scene, so he was ruled out. Joseph Barlow, the guy with the love notes, he apparently had an airtight alibi that 100% checked out, so he was ruled out as a suspect as well. So, what about Ben, the boyfriend? As we know, the boyfriend is usually the first suspect, and Ben was the last person to see her alive. However, he was pretty quickly cleared. The night that he called the police, he immediately gave them full consent to search his truck, search his apartment. He gave hair and DNA samples right away. His alibi was also airtight. Apparently, he was not home alone. There were other people there. And there was zero evidence linking him to the murder. So Ben was cleared. And that leaves Russell. And Russell became a suspect for a variety of reasons. First and foremost, he was a man that she was seen out with that night. And he was also a new friend, remember? So him and Angela met at a happy hour about a month prior to this. They both had mutual friends, and so they were both at this happy hour. He was actually a couple years older than Angela, and he was established in his career as an architect. And Angela, who was great at networking, thought that Russell would be a really good career connection for her. So they'd tried to connect several times earlier in the month, tried to do some lunches, but it just never ended up working out, which is why she decided to invite him out tonight. So far, Russell is a man that she was seen out with, and he's a new friend. So we don't know much about their friendship. If it ever was more than friendship in this past month, who knows? Also, the morning after going out with Angela, Russell attended a wedding in Dallas and then flew immediately home to Houston, which is something that police immediately thought might be suspicious. Leaving town the morning after his new friend gets murdered doesn't look great. But Russell didn't even know, according to him, that Angela was murdered. He said he didn't know anything about it until he returned to Dallas and police officers greeted him at his front door. Russell let the police search his apartment right then and there. He didn't think anything of it. He was like, I didn't do anything. Yeah, search my apartment. And so they did. They started digging around and they found a collection of knives and spears. Not great. However, these were not his. His roommate had just returned from an African safari and brought back a bunch of kind of like random weapons as souvenirs. Of course, when the police found them, like initially before knowing this the chips are stacking up against Russell at this point. So they brought him down to the station. They didn't cuff him and they didn't arrest him. They just asked him to come down and talk to them. Sounds harmless, but when he stepped outside, he saw that his entire apartment complex was surrounded by cops and not just like cop cars. There were cops crouched behind their car doors with their guns drawn. So, I mean, I'm reading this and just picturing a scene from like FBI or SWAT, the TV shows. And that's the type of scene when there is a serious criminal that you know or you really strongly suspect is guilty of something. At this point, they don't even know that much about Russell, let alone if he did anything. But that's what was happening. If I was Russell, I would be peeing in my pants for sure. He seemed kind of calm though, and he climbed into the backseat of the squad car. And as they drove, the cop who was driving took an exit that was not on the way to the police station and pulled off the exit and then stopped and looked back at Russell and said, "Does this look familiar?" or "Look familiar." Russell's like looking around like, "What?" He had no idea what the cop meant, so he didn't say anything. He just sat there. And the cop said, "This is where Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald." Weird. At first I was like, "What the F? Like, why would he what does this have to do with anything, you know?" Uh like are we going on a sightseeing tour? I just don't understand. And if I thinking about it, maybe is the cop like indicating that's what's going to happen to Russell? I don't know. I still don't know. If you have any thoughts on this, I'd love to hear them because I don't totally understand the purpose of taking this detour and then stopping and being like, this is where Jack Ruby, who is the FBI, some type of law enforcement, shot Lee Harvey Oswald. That's the only thing I can think of is they're trying to intimidate Russell, like that's going to happen to you. So police weren't just looking at Russell because he was a new friend who happened to leave town the morning after she was murdered, or the African knives. There was something else. There was a detail from the autopsy that also made them suspicious. So whoever had killed Angela was what is referred to as a non-secretor. It's a really unpleasant word, but basically what it means is that a non-secretor, you can't determine their blood type from their bodily fluids like saliva or semen. First of all, I didn't even know that was possible to determine someone's blood type from saliva or semen. And maybe that makes me sound ignorant, but I didn't. I had no idea. Uh, so apparently, look, this may not sound like a big deal. Okay, so what? You can't determine his blood type from his saliva or semen. But only 20% of the population are non-secretors. So Russell is part of this kind of small minority of people. Then there's his alibi. or lack of alibi. Remember, Angela and Anna dropped him off at his apartment that night, but he only lived a few blocks away. At the beginning of the night, he had walked over to Angela's place. So it wouldn't have been out of the question for him to just walk back over that night. So police suggested that Russell take a polygraph. They're like, "You're looking pretty guilty, buddy." And he said, "Okay." So he took a polygraph and he passed. But sadly for Russell, this didn't really matter. They just had it out for him. And so they kept coming after him. For the next 6 months, detectives picked him up regularly for questioning. They'd wait outside his office. Remember, he's an architect. They'd show up when he got home. They'd pull him in for questioning again and again and ask him the same things. They even went back and reevaluated his polygraph, deciding that he hadn't actually passed. It was now considered inconclusive. What? Then they just straight up accused him of doing it. They just said, "You did it. We know you did it." Their theory was that Russell was mad that Angela dropped him off that night because he had wanted to hook up with her. So he walked to her apartment and she let him in. According to police, Russell had sex with Angela and then, for some reason, snapped and stabbed her over and over and over again. That theory had kind of a big problem, I think, though. So if it had been Russell who had come to her door and knocked on her door, why would she call Ben and say, "Some guy knocked on my door asking to use the bathroom"? Why wouldn't she just have said Russell? She had talked to Ben about Russell before, that she met him and he would be great for, her career connection. It's weird. She would not. I mean, I guess that's not that's not like hard and fast evidence proving that he didn't do it. But it seems really strange that she would be like, she just went out all night dancing and drinking with this bro and her friend. And then he shows up and she calls her boyfriend. She's like super nervous and she calls her boyfriend and says, "Some guy." No, I just don't think it fits. And at this point, Russell is getting frustrated. He has been cooperating with police every step of the way for 6 months. But after this, after they just straight up accuse him, he was done. So he hired an attorney, and when the detectives dragged him in one more time, his lawyer got on the phone and said, "Either charge my client or take him home now." And just of note, Russell probably should have gotten an attorney right away. Remember, guys, just my opinion, but I feel like it's the right opinion. I feel like it's the right opinion that you can cooperate with police with a lawyer. Like, I know I feel like maybe this isn't such a thought anymore, or such a common cliche thought anymore, that like if you hire a lawyer, you look guilty. No, you don't. Maybe I mean, you don't. You look smart if you hire a lawyer. Like, no matter what, if I ever got pulled into an interrogation room or a police station where they wanted to question me, the only word out of my mouth would be lawyer. I know I've said that a lot, but I feel like it's important to continue reiterating. So, lawyer says, "Charge my client or take him home now." So they didn't charge him. So he did get to go home at that point. So after Russell's lawyer stepped in, you would think that the police would back off. But no. Their suspicion only grew. Now, they did stop talking directly to Russell, but they put him under 24-hour surveillance. And then, because of this 24-hour surveillance, they found out he was planning to leave for grad school in London, and they were not happy about this. To them, this isn't like, "Oh, Russell's trying to expand his education." No, he's a murder suspect trying to flee the country. Okay, let's pause on Russell for a moment and talk about a friend of Angela's that we haven't talked about yet, named Sheila Wysocki. Sheila and Angela were roommates their freshman year at SMU. And at first glance, they were kind of an unlikely pair. Angela, as we know, was outgoing, fun, life of the party type. Sheila was much more reserved, cautious, and not really into the party scene. She was not in the sorority, wasn't her thing. But despite their differences, they did end up clicking. At first, They didn't because Sheila did not like Lance. Remember, that was Angela's first boyfriend. Sheila was not crazy about him, so she kind of kept her distance. But once Lance and Angela broke up, Sheila and Angela kind of bonded a little bit more. They really bonded over the fact that both of them grew up without fathers, and by the end of freshman year, they were just inseparable. Sheila loved being around Angela. They quickly became best friends, and Sheila really loved Angela's outgoing energy, the way she could talk to everyone. And I think this is such a nice thing to say about somebody. Sheila said that Angela made everything feel like an adventure. I love that. I want someone to say that about me when I die. So I'm going to start working on making everything feel like an adventure. And then if someone listening could make sure to put that somewhere when I die, thank you. So they would drive around in Angela's little Toyota Supra. They would go bar hopping, meeting new people. They just had a ton of fun together. But the weekend that Angela was murdered, Sheila was not part of this outing because she wasn't in Dallas. She had gone home to visit her family. And sadly, while she was home, she got a phone call. And it was Barbara, one of Angela's sorority sisters. And all Barbara said is, Angela's been in an accident. So Sheila's first thought, I think a pretty normal one, she thought, okay, a car crash. So Sheila says, well, what hospital is she at? Barbara couldn't answer. She was just crying hysterically. And that's when Sheila was like, oh, Angela's not in a hospital. She's dead. Sheila has said that she felt immediately physically sick. Her hands started shaking and she just started screaming. Her mother ran into the room, but she couldn't even get the words out at that point. This was a moment where she felt like her whole world changed. She actually never even went back to college after that night. So early on, detectives did reach out to Sheila to talk to her about the different men in Angela's life because Sheila was one of Angela's best friends. So Sheila went and met the police at the station, and she hated it. From the second she stepped in, it felt awful. I mean, I don't know how else it's supposed to feel. You're going to the police station to talk about your best friend's murder. So that makes sense. But it just felt really impersonal and cold. And she just was not happy being there, obviously. And then she saw something that both turned her stomach and broke her heart at the same time. And that was a crime scene photo of Angela's body just sitting there on someone's desk. And it kind of hit her then that Angela wasn't the best friend of the police officer. She wasn't even really a person to them. She was just a case file, a photo on a desk, but not to Sheila. To Sheila, Angela was her best friend. And so not only wanted to help, she needed to help. And she needed to keep Angela from just being a photo on a desk in a police station. She wanted to do whatever she could to figure out who did this to her and get justice for her friend. And in those early days, Sheila was really, really convinced that it had to be Lance. Like, screw his alibi. She just couldn't let go of the fact that Lance had this dark side because she had actually been there when Lance cut up Angela's clothes and threatened her with a knife. So, in Sheila's mind, Lance is 100% capable of murder. But police really shut that theory down. They had already shut it down for themselves, but they did work on convincing her that Lance had an alibi. He was not in Dallas, and they had proof of that. He wasn't the guy. Instead, police told her that they were sure it was Russell Buchanan. One of the detectives laid out their theory for her. He said Russell had failed his polygraph, which, remember, guys, isn't even true. He passed it. And then later, the detectives decided it was inconclusive. That isn't the same thing as failing. And also, it seems very suspicious. Then they told her that Russell's DNA was a match for the semen found at the crime scene. Now, this is such a misleading statement because if someone said to me, well, if I'm Sheila and they say, well, Russell's DNA is a match for the semen found at the crime scene, in my head, okay, well, that's it. Like, open shut. It's his DNA. He did it. What they didn't do was they didn't specify that it's not like they found Russell's specific DNA chain that only matches him. they didn't tell her that they found that his DNA profile, essentially 20% of the population had the same one, that you could tell their blood, or you couldn't tell their blood type from their semen or saliva. That did not point specifically to Russell. That pointed specifically to 20% of the population. It could have been anyone. So they're misleading Sheila, first of all. Plus, Sheila has no reason to not trust law enforcement. She's 20 years old. She's had no bad run-ins with the police at this point in her life. So yeah, of course she's trusting law enforcement. She has no reason to think that they're lying or misleading her. And so, of course, when they ask for her help, she's like, yes, absolutely. I will do anything. So they wanted more information from Russell. Remember, they've stopped talking to Russell at this point, and they're just having him under surveillance. So now they want Sheila to kind of work on Russell for them. So they have her wear a wire and call him with, I don't know if it was she wore a wire. They were recording the conversations. I'm not going to try to decipher how they were doing it. But Sheila wore a wire and called him multiple times. She was trying to get him to say something incriminating. He never did. They even had her set up a dinner with him at a restaurant where they went and sat and had dinner. And she was asking him questions. She was wearing a wire and asking him questions that the police specifically told her to ask. But she didn't get anything. Russell never said anything suspicious. He never slipped up. His story never changed. But still, police were so locked in that he was the one who did this. They just needed to find the evidence that would like completely connect him to it, that they stopped looking anywhere else. They weren't looking at any other suspects. I mean, they really stopped looking at anything except for Russell. Detectives then told Sheila that Russell had hired a big name lawyer in Dallas, a guy named Richard Racehorse Haynes. And to Sheila, this is kind of confirming what the police are telling her, that Russell's the guy, because she thought like it's suspicious to hire some big hotshot lawyer if you're not guilty. Why don't you just hire like, a regular lawyer, which doesn't make, of course, if you're being accused of murder, you better hire the best lawyer. Of course. But to her, it just meant like, oh, he's got something to hide. Then they told her that Russell had fled the country, which again, not telling her the whole story. This reminds me of like how news works in our country, that, you hear a piece or they edit it so you just get this much of a sound bite and you're not getting the full context or the full story. Russell didn't flee the country. He left to go to grad school like he had been planning on doing for a while. It wasn't like this was a new thing. And he said, Angela was murdered. Oh, I got into grad school the next day and now I'm leaving for London. No, he had been planning this. And he went. And without any new evidence, there was really nothing the police could do about it. So their one and only suspect is gone. And that was that. For the next 20 years, Angela's case went cold. Now, during these 20 years, Russell built an incredibly successful career as an architect. His work has been featured in Architectural Digest. His homes and apartment buildings won major awards, and even had a table that he designed displayed in the Dallas Museum of Art. So Russell is thriving professionally, but he still has this dark cloud hanging over him. Like he was never officially cleared of this crime. For 2 decades, he spent living under suspicion. And at first I was like, well, who cares? Who would know, especially if he's in London? But people would know. You would want to tell people so that they didn't happen to find out, right? So, like when he started dating someone new, he had to explain that he had once been a murder suspect. And I'm not going to lie, no matter how much I liked a guy, if I just met him and we were like newly dating and he said he was a murder suspect, I'm out. I don't need to hear anything else. I don't need to hear the full story. I don't care how nice you are, how successful, how good looking, how anything, how much we connect. Doesn't matter. It's over. Bye. until you are completely cleared. And even then, I don't know. Even if something happened where he was completely cleared, mm, I don't think so. No thanks. I'll find someone else. But not every woman felt like that because in the early 90s, he got married. And his wife, Karen, says that she never doubted his innocence for a single second. However, until Angela's real killer was found, assuming it's not Russell, Russell's always going to carry this around. Now, for years after the case, started to go cold and then continued to, Sheila stayed in close contact with one of the detectives from Angela's case. They'd meet up at various bars, snuffers, cardinal puffs. I just wanted to include those names because, like, what snuffers? I love it. Cardinal puffs, such interesting bar names. Anyways, they would meet out at bars and talk about the investigation. When Sheila got married in 1988, she was still in touch with this detective. And so she even invited him to her wedding. That's how much she trusted this guy and like how close they had become. Eventually, Sheila moved to Nashville and started this new chapter in her life. She was now married. She became a mom to two boys. But Angela was never far from Sheila's mind. The case had gone nowhere, literally for 20 years, and that really weighed heavily on her. And with every passing year, her frustration over this just grew and grew. She couldn't stand to see Russell Buchanan thriving and becoming this like celebrated architect when Angela never got the chance to live her life. Remember, in Sheila's mind, Russell's guilty. And he's guilty in her mind because the police told her he's guilty. It wasn't like she just came up with this. The police basically said they didn't basically say, they said he's guilty. We're just looking for that clinching piece of evidence. There was something else. So one of the detectives had made a comment years and years ago that always sat in the back of Sheila's mind. They told her the first murder is always the hardest. And Sheila didn't totally like connect the dots on that right away when they said it. But over time, she turned it over in her head and realized it was like they were implying that Angela was Russell's first kill, but that there would be more. That there was the potential that for the past 20 years, Russell had just been out here, thriving as an architect and murdering women. So by the mid 2000s, Sheila couldn't take it anymore. Her kids were older in school. And for the first time in a while, she had plenty of time to kind of think about Angela and the case that never went anywhere. And then something happened. There was a night in 2004 when Sheila was at home. I believe she was in her bed working on some Bible study work. And she turned her head and she saw Angela just standing there, smiling. It was only for a few seconds, but it shook her. Was she dreaming? Was she imagining things? She didn't necessarily believe in ghosts, so she didn't know what was going on. She didn't hear any words. Angela didn't say anything, but Sheila felt confident that she got the message. And the message was, it's time. It's time to do something about my death. And Sheila knew what she had to do. So she started calling the Dallas Police Department to get Angela's case reopened. Now, the case wasn't technically closed, but it had gone very, very cold. And at the time, Dallas didn't have a cold case unit. So the Dallas police are only working active investigations. There isn't even a detective assigned to Angela's case anymore. The worst part, they didn't really seem to care. Even the detective that had come to her wedding, like, barely gave her the time of day. Sheila was frustrated, but she was not going to give up. So she started rallying some of Angela's old friends, her sorority sisters, classmates, anyone who was willing to help. And over time, Sheila and these friends who were willing to help flooded Dallas PD with over 750 phone calls, every time just begging them to open up the case or, reinvigorate the case, I guess you could say. And at one point, an officer told Sheila, no one has even called about this case in 20 years, which really broke Sheila's heart because she felt like Angela had been forgotten. And Sheila wasn't going to This was not okay with her. This was not going to stand. But no matter how many times she called the police, begging, asking for the case files, asking for someone to start looking into it again, nothing happened. So Sheila thought, well, if no one else is going to do anything, I will. So Sheila was living at the time, remember, in Nashville in a gated, guarded, like community. Uh, and she, in retrospect, she has said that she thinks that Angela's murder probably shaped this decision. She wanted to feel safe at all times. So she had gotten to know the security guards that worked the front gate where she lived. And they would talk from time to time. She occasionally vented about her frustration on the case. And one day he was kind of like, if you want to become a private investigator, I could sponsor you. And that was it. Sheila was like, yeah, oh, let's do that. So she decided she was going to become a private investigator and she was going to investigate Angela's case. So she studied like her life depended on it. She treated her studying, there's an exam. Apparently, to become a licensed PI, you have to be sponsored by someone who is a PI, I believe. And there's an exam that you have to take. And she treated this exam like she was applying to the Ivy Leagues. She studied like crazy and it paid off. She passed. So her thought was that being a licensed investigator would allow her to access the case files, evidence, and kind of force the police to deal with her. She also was banking on the fact that DNA technology had advanced significantly since 1984. So even though police weren't like going back to the case, pulling the evidence and submitting it to test the DNA again, she thought she could do that. She also, as a licensed PI now, was like, well, I'll take some other cases too, get some experience. So she started taking cases, mostly cheating spouses and kind of basic investigations like that. But her real focus was Angela. She even created what she called a war room in her house. And it's, like a murder board, essentially. Photos, case files, timelines, everything she could gather. She was researching other rapes and murders in the area at the time, searching for any kinds of patterns or commonalities. And of course, she was on the phone constantly with Dallas PD, who was at this point quite sick of her. They were so sick of her that just to shut her up, apparently, they decided to reopen the case. I know that that's not the correct word, but you know what I mean. They assigned a female detective to it. And for the first time in 20 years, Sheila felt like someone was actually listening to her. And that's when she learned something that shocked her. Police still had original evidence from Angela's case. Now, that is only shocking because years ago she'd been told that Angela's rape kit was lost in a flood and that evidence from her murder was pretty much gone forever. But now, suddenly it wasn't. They had Angela's fingernail clippings. That's, the DNA from when she fought back. And they also had semen from the crime scene. More DNA. And again, 1984, DNA testing is like barely a thing. Back then it was like exactly what I said. Russell's DNA matches 20% of the population, the entire population. That was like as much as they could narrow it down. So now, more than 20 years later, obviously we're in the mid 2000s, this DNA testing is a powerful forensic tool. So it did still take a lot of time. Police had to submit a formal request, and that process itself, just submitting the request, took about a year. But the sample was entered into CODIS, and in March 19th, 2008, I also saw 2009, but we'll let that slide. There was a match. So Sheila got a phone call from investigator Linda Crum, who said, "We got him." And Sheila, on the other end of the phone, is bracing herself, waiting to hear that name that she knew she was going to hear and was expecting to hear for 2 decades, Russell Buchanan. But that was not the name that the detective said. Instead, Sheila heard a name she didn't recognize at all. And at that moment, she realized everything she had believed for the past 20 years had been wrong. The name she heard was Donald Bess. He was a convicted rapist who was already serving a life sentence in Texas for 3 separate sexual assaults. And when investigators started digging into his past, the story became even darker. Back in 1977, he had been convicted of kidnapping and raping a woman in Houston. But in March of 1984, he was paroled. And later that year, he traveled to Dallas, where he crossed paths with Angela Samota. Police believe that on the night of October 12th, 1984, Donald Bess spotted Angela and zeroed in on her. They think he followed her home and then talked his way into her condo by asking to use the phone. This creeped me out. Uh, at his trial, Dallas Police Senior Captain Virgil Sparks, the original lead investigator on Angela's case, revealed something freaky. He said that when Angela's boyfriend, Ben McCall, knocked on the door that night, he thinks that Angela tried to get up or call out, and that's what set Bess off. He told the jury that he believed Angela's attempt to move or signal for help is what triggered Bess to stab her over and over and over again. So Ben was potentially outside knocking on the door while Angela was being murdered. My first thought was, well, how did this guy get out of the apartment if Ben was standing outside? Remember the phone? The phone was in his car. Like the like mobile phones weren't like an actual mobile phone. It had to be connected to your car back then. So Ben had gone to his car to call the police, and that's likely when Donald Bess exited the apartment. He cleaned himself up in that bathroom, walked out, and disappeared into the night. Also, during the trial, Dr. Claudia Werner, an OBGYN, testified about the lack of bruising or physical trauma on Angela's body. She explained that this was actually consistent with women who submit to sexual assault under the threat of extreme violence. So Donald threatened her because previous to this, I will note that Donald had not killed any of his rape victims. It grosses me out that I have to say multiple rape victims, but he did not kill any of them. So the theory again that this lead investigator had was that because she then did fight back, or not fight back, but like heard Ben and was trying to get his attention. Which, I mean, can't you understand? I can understand that. Like, fine, if he threatens you with a knife, that you are just going to lay there and just try to get your mind to go somewhere else. But if you hear your boyfriend knocking on the door, my first thought would be, oh my God, I'm saved. Like, I'm saved. Now, if this ever happens, I will know to not think that. And I will just stay quiet and hope that he goes on his merry way. But I think in that moment, the fear and the hope that you would be okay would, yeah, I would probably do the same thing. Um, so the blood spatter analysis, there was a blood spatter analysis guy, and he examined photos from the crime scene and autopsy and said that the voids in the blood pattern indicated that the attacker had been on top of Angela while stabbing her. And the pattern was consistent with the assailant straddling her on the bed, facing the headboard, attacking her with her right hand, which is, doesn't seem that profound. It seems like that makes sense. It took the jury less than an hour to decide Donald Bess's fate. They found him guilty of Angela's rape and murder. And on June 18th, 2010, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. But in the end, he never made it to the execution chamber. On September 1st, 2022, at the age of 74, he died of a heart attack in prison, which feels like a really pathetic, unjust ending for a monster who got away with murder for 24 years. Good that he died. I mean, that is good, but lethal injection would have perhaps been better. And once Angela's case was finally closed, going back a little bit, I know I just explained that Donald Bess died in 2022, but back when the case was closed, Sheila thought, well, I'm going to retire my private investigator's license and just move on. She did what she set out to do. She helped get justice for Angela. It had finally been served. But then the letters started coming in. And at first it was just a few survivors, families of victims, people desperate for help with their own unsolved cases. And Sheila would call them back and give them advice and walk them through what they could do, but was basically like, I'm not really going to keep doing this. But the letters didn't stop. They kept coming and kept coming. And Sheila realized my work's not done. So she didn't retire her license. She decided she would keep helping people. Also, after the trial, Sheila did something that she never thought she would do. She picked up the phone and she called Russell Buchanan. And she said, I would like to meet and talk to you about the past. For years, she had been furious at this man. She had hated him because she really, truly, deep down believed that he was the one who killed Angela. And she was bitter about the fact that Russell had like lived this wonderful, school in London and Architectural Digest, and like he had lived this very full life. And Angela never got the chance to, and she thought that was because of him. But now she knew he didn't do it, and she felt the need to make it right. So she wanted to ask him for forgiveness. And they did end up meeting face to face. And later they even went together to visit Angela's grave together. And after everything that these two had seemingly been through, maybe not together, but simultaneously, they, there was decades of suspicion and frustration. And for Russell, just, I can't even imagine what that must have been like for him. After all of this, Russell said something to Sheila that she never expected. He thanked her. He said because of her persistence, the truth had finally come out. And for the first time in over 20 years, that cloud of suspicion over him was finally gone, and Angela had true justice. And that is our story for today. A tough one. Anybody, all of these are tough. I know. I always say that. But I really love that Sheila, the story of Sheila is so uplifting, and what she did and her determination and the lengths that she went to. To become an actual private investigator just to get justice for her friend from 20 years prior. I think it's really an incredible thing. I would love to meet Sheila. I know that Sheila has appeared on several podcasts talking about this. She's written several articles. I want to say that she was on the criminal podcast. I'll have to check. But I think it's pretty amazing what she did because Angela's case, let's be honest, would have never been solved without her. And it's this whole entire case and story, Angela's story and Sheila's story, is proof that persistence matters. And even decades later, justice can be served. Nonetheless, it's just me, guys. So my heart goes out to Angela's family, friends, loved ones, and Sheila as well. And Russell. Oh man, must have been a very emotionally tenuous 20 years for all of them. So, and that is it for today. So, as always, thank you for listening. I love you guys. I know this is a little bit late, and if you listened or watched, I guess, I know my face is all red. I had a rough afternoon, so apologize if I sound all nasally and look all puffy. I had a crying spell right before jumping on here, which I know probably makes me sound like a lunatic, but sometimes you got to cry it out, right? Nothing crazy, so not even worth mentioning, but just wanted to let you know that I wasn't like busy picking my nose before I got on here or anything. It's red because I cried. Oh boy, that's it, guys. I'm going to sign off now. It is too late for me to be doing this. So until next time, I hope you all stay safe, lock your doors, don't let any strangers in late at night. And I will be back at some point this week with a mini crime story. I'm going to stop saying a specific day. It's just going to be like a surprise for you guys. Every week, you just won't know. It's just going to pop up and surprise you when the mini crime story drops. Because I know everybody's sitting by their podcast app waiting. Uh, but if I say Wednesday, if I say tomorrow, then something's going to happen tomorrow and it won't actually be till Thursday. So I am doing my best to make sure the Tuesday episodes always come out on Tuesday. The mini crime stories you can be surprised about. That's it. Love you all. Thank you for listening and good night.
Death by Southwest is hosted by Jenna Schneider and Margot Carmichael.
Executive produced by Margot Carmichael.
Produced by Jenna Schneider.
Audio editing and sound design by Margot Carmichael.
Music by Soundstripe.
And a special thanks to Edward R. Murrow for letting us borrow his famous sign-off phrase, good night and good luck.